Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's 60-minute presentation as part of the Wednesday Rainmaking webinar series by the ABA Women Rainmakers Committee for Law Practice Division with co-sponsor ABA Young Lawyers Division. This webinar is being recorded and we will be sending the video and slide deck in a follow-up email. Questions will be addressed after the presentation. Please enter your questions using the Q&A tab on the bottom toolbar of the Zoom screen. We will try to answer all of your questions, but if we run out of time, there will be space on the evaluation form to ask additional questions. Please assist our Women Rainmakers Committee by taking the time to complete the evaluation survey. This assists us in developing future programs. We welcome and encourage your input. To start today's program, I would like to introduce today's moderator, Sandra Havrilak. Sandy joins us from Fairfax, Virginia, where she is a principal in the Havrilak law firm specializing in family law. Thank you all for joining us. We'll now begin the webinar.
Hi, good afternoon. We thank all the Rainmakers around the country who have chosen to learn more about mothers in the law, confronting the challenges and celebrating the victories. The mission of the ABA Women Rainmakers is to educate professional women about marketing and business development, to provide mentoring opportunities for members, and to provide networking opportunities to build personal and professional relationships. You can find up-to-date information regarding our initiatives and programming by visiting the ABA Women Rainmakers homepage. We hope you will join us for our next Women Rainmakers webinar on December 8th, 2021. Today, we are fortunate to have a very wonderful panel who will provide valuable insights on motherhood in the law. Today's speakers are Rebecca Hughes Parker, Ruby L. Powers, and Stephanie A. Scharf. Rebecca is an attorney and the global editor-in-chief of two legal publications, the Cybersecurity Law Report and the Anti-Corruption Report, part of Eon Analytics. She steers the editorial, business, and technological strategies of the products and manages a team of lawyers and reporters. Rebecca has a very broad base of experience, and I'm not going to spend too much time going through it because I want everybody to have time to participate in this webinar. I will say that Rebecca also comes from big law before she switched to this profession. Ruby L. Powers is the founder of Powers Law Group PC, a Houston-based full-service immigration law firm, and is board certified in immigration and nationality law. She is a child of an immigrant and married to an immigrant and has lived in 6 countries. She is a frequent national and international speaker, author, and media resource on the topics of immigration law and the policy and law practice management. In 2019, AILA published her book, Build and Manage Your Successful Law Practice Without Losing Your Mind. Go for it, Ruby. Ruby also is very active in the ABA Women Rainmakers, and we welcome you and look forward to hearing from you. Stephanie A. Scharf is a founding partner of Scharf Bank's Marmor LLC, a prominent women-owned law firm that represents national and global businesses in litigation. In 3 decades of representing clients in federal and state courts, Stephanie has tried and won multiple jury trials, bench trials, and has spearheaded the pre-trial, trial, and appellate phases of litigation, and has overseen the resolution of multiple commercial dispute and complex tort actions. Stephanie frequently counsels companies on strategies to avoid litigation and mitigate risk at the product or enterprise level. Stephanie has also authored many books, and she has received many awards. All 3 are very successful women, and we welcome you, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts on this. We're very excited today to have this discussion, and I'd like to turn it over to Stephanie to get us started. I don't see Stephanie.
Stephanie, you're muted.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And I also very much appreciate your very gracious introduction. I'm happy to be here today and speak to everybody. I'm going to spend probably 5 minutes on setting the context for our discussion today. Some of you may know that along with my research colleague, Bobby Liebenberg, I've done a lot of database studies on women in the law. And one that we did right before the pandemic is called Walking Out the Door. It was an American Bar Association sponsored research study. It has a lot of data on how women advance into senior levels and why women stay or do not stay. One of our tables shows the list of the top reasons why experienced women lawyers who have practiced for at least 15 years, and these were all lawyers in law firms, why they leave the practice of law. And you can see that there's a combination of caretaking, child care commitments, work-life balance, family and other personal concerns, and also the stress of practicing in firms, the emphasis on marketing, the number of billable hours, just everyday stresses at work. And sometimes it just results in, or at least for half these people who tell us why experienced women lawyers leave, women just don't want to do it anymore. Next slide, please. Another really interesting fact from this study is the disconnect between what managing partners think about their efforts to advance women lawyers in their firms and what women think. And the blue bars are actually, they are managing partner data, but I will say the senior men in the firm were basically the same. So you can see that firm leaders think that they're great advocates and gender diversity is widely acknowledged effort and the firm has been successful with gender diversity, but the women in the firm are far less likely to reach that conclusion. And I think it's important to keep that in mind when we talk later about what can firms do about making changes. Next slide, please. So this is the cover page of a study that came out just this past April 2021. It's another study that I did with Bobby Liebenberg. It was a study of thousands of ABA members. It actually was designed to be and was analyzed as a representative sample of the hundreds of thousands of ABA members. It captured a broad array of experiences and reactions in all settings, in all practice areas, and there also was a special focus on women and lawyers of color. And if we turn to the next slide, I'm going to show you some of the findings. And some data, especially for women, stand out. And certainly there were high levels for men and women, but higher levels for women about stress and burnout and being overwhelmed, that it's hard to keep home and work separate, that they feel disengaged from their firm or their company, overwhelmed, have trouble taking time off from work, the thinking that, and the reality for many people was the day never ends. And also the experience just doing work was very stressful. And I will say, we had a question about, do you feel stress simply on account of your gender? And over 50% of women say at least sometimes, and even often or almost all the time, they feel stress at work on account of their gender. And women of color having an even higher percentage of feeling stress at work simply on account of their gender. So if we can turn to the next slide. The pandemic also led to new thinking about part-time work. You can see that there was a feeling that lower billable hours, which by the way, basically didn't happen in the pandemic except occasionally, that lower billable hours or reduced workload was important and allowing part-time work was important. And the people who really called those factors very or extremely important, the highest percentages, not surprisingly, were women with children. They really bore the brunt of a lot of the stresses that came out of trying to handle work during the pandemic. And if we go to the next slide, you can see that women with dependent children the highest group that's thinking about working part-time is where dependent children are age 5 or younger. And others as well, but this was a group that really got hit because of childcare and having to do it all every single day and never getting respite from never getting respite from work or the things that had to be taken care of at home. Next slide, please. So the last data set I want to show you is a lot of women lawyers in particular, and women with dependent children even more, are looking for better wellness and family resources from their employers. And these percentages are those people think who it is either very or extremely important that there be a subsidy for child care or some kind of family care subsidy, that there's better plans for family leave and sick leave, and that generally there are better wellness resources, should be better wellness resources available to lawyers. And one of the things that it's not in the slide that people are also focused on, and I think will come up today, is having meaningful hybrid or remote work policies. Not the kind of policies that existed in the past where basically if you worked remotely you were sidelined, but policies that can treat those people who are taking advantage of the policies to still be included, still have opportunities for training and learning and advancement. And that to me is a major challenge for all employers today. And finally, this very last slide is some of the big picture concerns. Tremendous pressure on women with children, higher levels of stress at work. We really need effective DE&I strategies. They've kind of been installed, oddly enough, the data show, during the pandemic. There are very high levels of feeling disengaged from work. Employers really need to deal with that. And there's certainly more thought about, is it worth it all? So I think that's it for the setup and the slides, and I'm going to turn it back to Sandy.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, for that great information, for setting the stage for our discussion. Rebecca, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background? Actually, before I do that, Stephanie, why don't you tell us a little more about your background experience before we pass the baton to Rebecca?
Okay, well, thank you. Well, I've been practicing law for about 35 years. When I left law school, I had 2 degrees, a JD and a PhD in social psychology, but I really wanted to practice law. I liked the law. And for about 25 years, I was an associate and then a partner in 2 very big law firms. One was Kirkland & Ellis, and then I was a partner there and moved to be a partner at Jenner & Block. And over time, I really became aware of what was happening with women in the law. So I said, you know what, I've done research before, so I started to do research studies. I founded the NAWL annual survey and did that for about 8 years. And I'd done other studies, often with Bobby Liebenberg. We did first chairs at trial, more women need seats at the table. And I showed you a couple of the other studies we've done. And I feel I did that because I found anecdotes were not very persuasive, but firm leaders. And a broader array of people were much more convinced when we had data. And so I find it very gratifying to combine the research and the practicing law.
Great. Rebecca, why don't you tell us about your background?
Am I unmuted? Yes. Thank you. It's great to be here with this panel of women, and I love this data. And I'm glad we're talking about this topic. So as Sandy mentioned, I am the editor-in-chief of 2 legal publications. And I guess relevant to this discussion, I am a mother who has 3 daughters. And I actually had my first 2 as twins, my first year in big law litigation in 2004. So over 16 years ago now. And the third one I had in 2011 while still litigating in that same firm in big law litigation. So I've been the primary earner with my husband as the primary caregiver since I had the twins those years ago. And, it's been an interesting ride. I know we did discuss in Stephanie's great data, the reduced hours, and I did take advantage of that first part of my career at 80%. And that did work actually pretty well for me. I will say I'm glad that I was able to do that. And I did work with some very good mentors and great lawyers that I think helped that work. I guess I'll say that when I originally graduated from college and law school, I thought I could flip this script and just be, just do this, be a mother lawyer, but kind of act like the way you might think a father would. And it was more difficult than I thought it would be. My father was an amazing lawyer. He was a great dad to 6 kids. And, I think for a mother, it was a little harder for me to do that. And so I guess in the ensuing years, I thought a lot about why that is, and kind of what society expects of mothers that we might not expect so much of fathers on a consistent basis. And I think that's really kind of affected how I thought about my career. And I really love the data. I agree with Stephanie that having these numbers instead of just anecdotes is really helpful. And I am not surprised by a lot of that. I think a lot of women probably on this call are not surprised by it. I'll say that in my own experience with a stay-at-home father, over 16 years, I've heard so many times about how great he is with the kids and how it's great that he does the cooking. It's great he does the cleaning. Even a month ago, oh, it's so great that how he is at drop off at camp. And it always makes me think about how we really don't hear that so much when it's the mother who often does do these things. I have said to mothers, you do this, you're great too. And I think that is kind of telling as to just how we think what the role of a mother is and what the role of a father is in a general sense that I think is contributing to all of this. Of course, we're stressed out. We have more on our plate sometimes, the second shift, the famous second shift. I'll mention a study I read this summer in the New York Times where they asked 725 mothers with partners at home, who does a child first go to if they have a problem? And 9 in 10 said it was the mother. So we still think that it's the mother the child goes to first and not the father. And I'll let the other great panelists speak. I'll just end with the idea that when I hear about policies benefiting mothers, this takes childcare needs into account, so it benefits mothers. I do wince a little because I'd like to hear it benefit parents, because all these policies, they benefit dads too. So I think, hearing that more in the future, I think will be helpful for women, as we go on. So thank you so much.
Right. Before we turn it over to Ruby, I just want to say we have a comment that was, when my husband was a stay-at-home dad, everyone would say, wow, he's such a hands-on dad. I mean, that's what we're talking about. Ruby, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much. And definitely honored and learned so much from this panel, and great we can have this conversation. I think what's important to me is to have role models. I think that's a theme of this conversation, and also to change the conversation and be the leaders and do what we want to see in this space. And so I think that's a good summary of what I've seen. I graduated law school during the Great Recession, and I started my firm in 2009. So I call it my first baby. And then I had 2 human babies. So I have 3 children. My law firm's the oldest one of them all. I had to create my own firm because I needed a balance with my children. And when I look at those data, Stephanie, thank you for sharing that. My life did change when my youngest turned 5. Like, it was just a game changer. And I think a lot of that also could be they're eligible to go to kindergarten. But if you don't have the means for pre-K and daycare and all that, but also for independence and, what how much effort they need at home and things like that. My aunt was a role model. She had her own firm. She had her office near the childcare near the house. And that's exactly what I did. My daycare, their kids' school, and my office and my house are all within like 5 minutes of each other. I had the luxury of putting that in place, but that's really how I save time, is not having to drive around, so I can focus on all the other things that I have to juggle. So I didn't have maternity leave. Unless you count maybe 1 week or a few days. I went to court the second week after giving birth to one of my kids. I remember answering emails from the NICU for my second child. I was doing consults from the lobby of the NICU. I mean, what are you supposed to do? I mean, I'm not big law. I don't have a big infrastructure. I hired my first associate when I had my my second child because I knew I needed some support and I couldn't be the only lawyer in my firm. So that bring that sort of small firm, small law perspective to the table. And I think having role models helped me see what can be done. And then I kept pushing the envelope even more. I later wrote a book on law practice management. And so many of the books I read to write my book were written by men. So I think, it's another example of how we have to keep sort of challenging the norm. And I also ran for office when my children were ages like 6 and 8. And I had a lot of the similar conversations. Am I at home? Am I with my kids? How can I do this? All of those things. And I do see that bias towards women running who have children that are more like in elementary school age. And so, I like to walk the walk. I hire contractors or employees who are moms, who are reentering the workforce, or who want that flexibility, because I'm trying to create that environment that I didn't have and that I had to create on my own. And so those are just some of the, what I'd like to bring to this conversation, the table. And I just enjoy learning from us all and sharing in the wins on how we can change this conversation going forward.
Well, if we go to the next slide, and thank you very much, Ruby. Some of our objectives today are understanding and dismantling the motherhood penalty. Who wants to address what is the motherhood penalty?
I think it's the assumption that the mom is the one who's going to do everything. And the second shift and that mental load. And I think that's part of the conversation of what it is.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Rebecca or Stephanie?
I was going to say, I think Ruby is right there in the ballpark. To me, the motherhood penalty, what we call the motherhood penalty, is really not just an implicit bias, it's often an explicit bias, where you are not given the opportunities that others are given to learn and to advance and to get experiences. I can't tell you how many times I have had friends who have reported that once they had a baby, they no longer were asked to travel, they weren't asked to get on the trials. There were a lot of activities that fell away, and they felt that they were being penalized because they were mothers. And I know, because I've heard people who are partners make comments about just not asking someone to do something. Well, she's a mother, she can't travel. She's a mother, she can't do this. So it's a very serious problem.
Well, Stephanie, how do moms, lawyers step up to the plate then to prove to those people who are overseeing them that they can do all those things and be a mom, and a good mom at that?
Well, I think there are lots of ways to be a good mom. I certainly was not home as much as perhaps some other mothers were when their children were young. And I don't think there's any one way to step up, but I will tell you what I did. Prodded, by the way, by a husband who was not shy, even though I was. I went around to the senior people in the firm and say, I would like to be on a case with you. And if they didn't do anything after 2 months, I went back and asked. And it was very effective because I got very good sponsors that way by asking to do things that I knew were important for me to do.
Right. Anybody else have thoughts on this? I'm noticing we have some chats going on here, and I'll just read a couple if anybody care to comment on it. Someone said the motherhood penalty is bias displayed towards you in the workplace because you have caregiving responsibilities. I think we all agree with that, right? And then motherhood penalty is having to hide who you are in the hiring process. What do you think of that comment?
I agree. I think it's because of the assumptions that we're talking about, that if you're the mother, you're going to be doing a lot of the caregiving. So when that assumption is there, then you have to hide it because you don't want that assumption to be made automatically. Like what Stephanie was saying, sometimes they don't even ask the mother if she can do it. They assume that she can't do it. I think I had to learn I agree that you have to ask for your assignments. I also had to learn how to advocate for myself, and which can feel a little weird at first, but it worked in the end. And I think that was something I had to learn, and to show people that it is harder for a mother because of the assumption, to show people that you're still there, that you can still do this work. So I certainly faced those challenges. I think in my career, in terms of hiring, I was actually pregnant with twins when I started, so, so I couldn't really hide that too well. And I had them very early, actually. So so I didn't get to practice too long, I think 3 months before I had twins, premature twins. So I'm not sure about that. But I definitely agree that the assumption is a big problem. And I am optimistic that's getting better. I am.
And we were also asked, can anyone address the added piece of parents of special needs children and their need for even greater flexibility in the workforce? Ruby, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that, this is just part of the conversation about whether you're a caregiver, regardless of your gender. We need that flexibility, and we need to be able to advocate for ourselves and not have that penalty, whether it's a motherhood penalty or caregiver penalty or what have you, that we have that flexibility to be able to have the career and be the caregiver. I've seen some of my friends with these struggles, and having to work with doctors and teachers and everything. I know that can be very challenging to navigate that process. Just this conversation is bringing me flashbacks and like maybe PTSD to like one time I had to fly to court in another city, and I had to breast pump in my client's car. I know this sounds weird. I had to cover because we were about to go to court, and I didn't have any other place to do this. and then I had to go do the hearing, and then I had to fly back on the same day, or I remember limiting my my conference travel, even though it was professional travel for work, just because there was this assumption that my children were young and I needed to be with them, or limiting my social happy hours or something along those lines to maybe once a month, just because my kids were small, and like missing out on those networking opportunities. As a small business owner, you're just always out there and about, rainmaking, And so I think that being able to have this conversation is just refreshing, honestly, because I feel like so often we can't have this in an open professional setting. It's just sort of like more of like we're just venting and then we're moving on. But to be able to share and figure out how we can help each other, I'm just very grateful to that.
What about how do you succeed as a lawyer mom? What's your key to that success? Rebecca?
So that's a broad one, I think. I mean, I can say that I learned as a mother over the years, and this is very difficult, I think, in the moment when your kids are young, to try to take the longer view in terms of what really matters, where I needed to be at that moment. Did I really need to be at this meeting with the kid? Looking back, probably I didn't, but I thought at the time I did. So I wish I, at the time, had a longer perspective and didn't worry so much, because I have to remember we are good role models for our kids. And I think as they get older, you can see that more, as opposed to when they're 1 year old or 2 years old. It's harder for them to process this, but we are good role models, I think. That's something to keep in mind as in our career. So I think that was one key for me to remember that I was a good role model, to try to think about what I really needed to do and why. And if I was feeling guilty, I think guilt is it's on our slide, and it's a theme of many mothers. Why was I feeling this mommy guilt? Was this because of something that society was imposing on what a mother should be? Or was this something real guilt? Because I love being a lawyer and an editor, and I love being a mother. So, I had to sort of think, what do I want to do now? And as opposed to what I think society wants me to do or expects me to do as a mother. So for me, that was really important.
Do you think daddies have the guilt too?
A little bit. I don't want to take away from that. Daddies have guilt too, but I do think that there is difference in what we expect of a mother and what we expect of a father as a society. So I'm speaking in kind of general terms. There's certainly daddy guilt, and dads do great jobs as well.
So I'd like to riff off a little bit about what Rebecca said, because I actually think that succeeding the skills that you need or the attitudes you need to succeed as a mom are similar to what you need to succeed as a lawyer. So what does it mean to succeed as a mom? I mean, maybe people care about, I never cared if my kids got dirty. I didn't buy their clothes, the babysitter did. It's just something that I didn't do. I didn't do a lot of things that were what I'd call everyday, although I went to every school play and every parent teacher meeting. So why do I say the skills are the same? Because you really need to have judgment about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And you need to have patience with the process. And you need to keep your eye on what you really want to do, what the end game really is, and what really matters. And so I don't see the two as that dissimilar, although I recognize that people make very different judgments about what they think is important to do with and for their children.
With regard to new young lawyers in particular, but not necessarily, how do you prepare to be that lawyer mom, that successful lawyer mom that we know women are? Ruby.
Okay, well, I think first of all, it's echoing Rebecca and Stephanie, you have to figure out who you want, what you want, because what a successful or mom or lawyer mom, it can mean different things to different people. So you got to figure out what that means to you. So, and then like truly to you, so you can try to shake off the societal expectations and the mommy guilt. And then I would say, once you figure that out, which might not be overnight, you might have to think about it for a while. And you need to rely on help. You need to, because like I had to get the daycare close by. I had to probably leave a little early sometimes. I had to rely more on maybe a daycare babysitter, childcare, a nanny sometimes if I could have one. I ran my law firm from my house in the beginning, and I had the nanny on the second floor with the baby 3 days a week. And so I just tried to do all the consults on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So Monday and Friday, I could take care of him by myself, try to work. And that was my first child. And then whenever I had to breastfeed, she'd bring him down to me. And so that's sort of like works. You have to figure out what works for you. And then you have to keep adapting. And then you also, if you have a partner, you need to have them help. And just don't, I think that's another part of this conversation is just because you're the mom doesn't mean you have to do everything. And whether you think you were indoctrinated that way, you think that way, or someone else is imposing that on you. And so try to break that mentality. And so amongst building up a support network, having that time for self-care, and relying on help, and you don't have to do everything. And I think that's one of the things I remember learning in law school somewhere on this conversation is like, you might be able to do everything, but not at the same time. And so you're just going to have to figure out, maybe I'm in the baby carrying phase, and that will pass after a few years. And then maybe I'm in the whatever phase, and then I'm going to work harder on my business or whatever it may be. But you have to find some type of a balance.
One of the questions or observations was that the motherhood penalty includes getting assignments that are not as high profile or complex and won't help contribute to you making partner. What are your thoughts on that? Stephanie? You're on mute.
Yeah. So that's a very good question, and it's a very good point. And you will get assignments like that. So my view is you have to do a really good job on every assignment, but at the same time, I'm going to sound like a broken record. You got to walk into more than one partner's office and say, I would like to do this, or I would like to do that. I'm here, I'm working hard, I really need these other opportunities. And you just have to keep asking. You'll get them if you ask, but you may not get them if you don't ask.
Rebecca, what are your thoughts?
I definitely agree about being forward and asking. If you're a litigator, you're gonna have to step up and show how you can ask. I think it's perennially a challenge for women, and there are a lot of biases against, again, not only mothers, but women as well. I mean, I can remember, a friend told me she was in law school 20 years ago, she went for a law firm interview and he said, I'm surprised that an Asian woman wants to be a litigator. And that's only 20 years ago. And so you're still fighting a lot of that. And I think I said before, to sort of get your own style and what you're comfortable with. And that was really important for me to know how I was going to take a deposition, which wasn't the same exactly as someone else. And that made me more comfortable, I think, taking them and going forward. So I think that's really important.
And I'd like to add that this is the Women Rainmakers Committee. So asking very senior people in the firm for business, in essence, is very good practice for going out there and working with clients and doing asks of clients.
So let me just ask you, as an employer, looking to hire or having people who work for me, and I employ women lawyers. I've tried men, by the way. So it's not a discriminatory thing, but how do you get the woman mom in particular, and I'm not picking on them, but you have to work, right? You have those goals of your billable hours, and you have to go out and generate, because that's how we move up in firms. How do you get women? I mean, there's not enough time in a day, right? Rebecca, let's face it, all you guys, it's tough. How do you do it? How do I, as an employer, get them to do it?
I work with a lot of women who are very efficient. I think we were talking before about how there are some overlapping skills that work, being a mother and a lawyer, and I think a lot of mother lawyers are very efficient. So they've been great, and I think checking our assumptions helps a lot, and being straightforward and asking what the issues are helps a lot too, so that you're not just guessing whether they have to go to pick up the kid at daycare or not. And I found that being flexible and working with them, really does work. And I think all of us wish that a lot of law firms had more of that, built into it.
One of the questions that came up in the chat was that I am currently a student and will be entering the workforce in my early 30s and hope to have children soon. I am so nervous about being judged for having kids so soon after starting a job or being looked over for opportunities. Do you have any specific suggestions of how to manage the firm culture in relation to this? Ruby?
I think that it's important to find some other mentors in the firm that have had families, and ask them, how did the firm react, or what was it conducive, or was it challenging? And and search out a culture that works for you, because if you found that there's only one female partner and she didn't have children, maybe it's for whatever reason, and maybe you talk with them and find out it's because they didn't think that it was conducive with the culture. I mean, then maybe that's a telltale sign that might not be the right firm for you, for example. So I think if you can find somebody who reach out and find some mentors, but I don't think you should be worried about it. I mean, if you want to have children, you should be able to have children. And I mean, I know that's part of this whole conversation. I mean, I guess my solution was just have my own firm, and that's not easy for everyone. It's not easy, but and not everyone, we shouldn't have to do that, right? We shouldn't have to do that to have the flexibility. So I mean, I don't know, that's just how I solved it. But I mean, I try to be the employer that I couldn't find, by being like one of my staff members, she had to leave at this certain time to be able to go pick up her kid and then clock in later remotely and this and that. And I was like, okay, fine, we'll make it work. Or when people I wanted to mention this, when I've had a lot of women re-entering the workforce, they'll put huge gaps. It's maybe not necessarily attorneys, but some other legal assistants or whatever on their resume. And I'm like, what, go ahead and put it in there, what you did, and all these transferable skills of having children and managing home or whatever you might have done. Like, don't hide that. I know that you'll be able to have the skills to do a lot of what I need in these different roles. And so anyway, those are just some of my thoughts along those lines, but that I can understand the concern.
What about mentorship? How important is that in this conversation? Finding someone to help you find your way through the system in your firm. Stephanie, what are your thoughts on that?
I actually think that I make a distinction, and many people do, between mentors and sponsors. I think that sponsors are really much more important. I mean, it's nice to have people as a sounding board as mentors, but I think that it cuts through a lot of doors if someone will basically pound the table for you. No, she's really good. She needs to go to the next level. No, she's really good. She needs to make the same amount of money as so-and-so. No, she's really good. I insist that she get this. And there are people in firms, if you develop relationships with them and working relationships and you do good work, they will help you. Not everybody will, but there are people, and I know in my own career, I had two mentors, sponsors who were men, both senior men. Nobody in their right mind would have put us together. I mean, one guy was a former Army colonel and everything was very organized and everything had to be done a certain way. But guess what? He was a great lawyer and he taught me a lot and he appreciated that I was on his team and he helped me. And similarly, the second person, nobody would have put us together, but it worked. And I really, really was benefited by having sponsors.
What about the question, which I think goes into you're working with these people that you've described, is it okay to set boundaries about work schedules sometimes? I feel guilty about doing so, but for example, I'm declining a case that's really far away because I don't want to have to travel overnight away from my toddler into a faraway county. What do you think of that?
I think it's, there isn't a right answer necessarily. I think it's important for you to know what you want to accept and what you want to decline. I personally wouldn't go into details about the reasons. I would just say, that's not something I can handle now, but let's try and look for something else going forward. I wouldn't go into sort of the reasons why, but I think that you have to understand where your limits are. And it's hard because you may be in a setting where everybody's throwing things at you, but you've got to maintain your sanity and maintain your life.
So we have an interesting comment. The partners who were mothers in the firm where I worked in years ago were often the least sympathetic and most judgmental of other attorneys who are new mothers. How do you deal with that? Rebecca, what do you think?
Yeah, that's tough. I was lucky. To Stephanie's point about mentors and sponsors, I think I had both at my law firm, some men as well, and that was really important, I think. And I tried to do that to young, as I became a more senior associate, to younger associates as well, who maybe wanted to take 80% or were trying to navigate things like that. In terms of mothers who were unsympathetic, I didn't really experience that too much. I think, I just did the best work I could for them. I don't really have a great answer for that one, I will say. I did see a question about asking for reduced hours and how you do that. And I did do that in the firm right after they had initiated a new policy for new mothers. And I was a young attorney and I was nervous, I will say. And it was not an easy thing to ask for, but I'm very glad that I did it. And so you kind of have to be confident in yourself and your own skills as well. And I just was very confident that I could do it. And the partner in charge asked me if I was still serious about my career when I asked for that. And that, that did throw me off a little bit, but I assured him that I definitely was. And since I was at the firm for 8 years, I think, he didn't lose me, but I just think confidence is a big thing that you need when you ask for that, because it's easy to second guess yourself.
So does anyone have any advice for an early career lawyer parent who are feeling depleted and not, in quotes, feeling like they can do anything a man/father can do right now. I'm a first-year associate with 2 kids under 5, and am feeling like I do not have, and I'm sorry, I do not have the confidence and drive that I did before the pandemic, even with adequate child care support now in place.
I would just say, I feel like this conversation also goes well with self-care. And we're dealing with a pandemic that's going way too long than we'd ever expected. We didn't want it in the first place, but here it is, and we're almost into year 2. And we're attorneys, which is a very stressful career. And then we're moms on top of that. So we've got to cut ourselves some slack. I think we need to be in check. Like, maybe we've kept all the balls in the air and everyone's alive, and nobody, you know, in my firm, nobody's deported, and we're keeping everybody okay. But at the same time, you know, are we exhausted? Yes. Do we need personal time on a regular basis? Yes. Do we need self-care routine? Yes. And, you know, when I was researching for my book on it, I put a whole chapter on self-care. It's not just like, you know, a glass of wine and a bubble bath. It's like emotional, physical, mental, spiritual, like, and ongoing. And I think it's okay if we're feeling burnt out. And we need to just acknowledge that and take care of ourselves and ask for help. You know, that's what I would say about that. So I feel your pain. And I think that we should all be support each other in acknowledging what we're going through.
So I'd say that prioritizing is also important too. I think that was touched on before, that having a sense of the things that you want to do as a mother and prioritizing those and trying to let some others fall away that you might not need to do. And maybe the same thing in setting boundaries at work with the things you really want to do. I think I was lucky that my plate was pretty full. So when some things came up that I didn't want to do, I didn't really have to say yes to them because I had a lot of other things. So that could be another take every opportunity that's good, because then you're busy when a bad one comes. I know that when I was with my 3rd child in the 3rd trimester, I didn't really want to travel because my twins were so premature that I was very nervous traveling in the 3rd trimester, and I was able to not do that, thankfully. So I did set that boundary for myself around work, but I would say and the same thing with self-care, like if there's a hobby that you like, I think you can try to work that in, prioritize that as well. And that helps feeling less guilty about work and about motherhood, because you sort of decided what is important to you and what you're going to try to not feel guilty about not doing.
So our chair of Women Rainmakers, Courtney Ward-Reichert, has asked a question. Can you share your thoughts on how the pandemic has created opportunities for women? I began working remotely 10 years ago in order to move to a smaller town to raise my children and to have more time with my daughter, who has some special needs. Let me see, I'm sorry, I'm losing the chat here. I apologize, I totally lost the chat there.
And there were 2 questions in the Q&A. I just put them in the chat, so
okay,
we could try to address them.
Will you please address how to handle female leaders, managers who promulgate the motherhood penalty, and the converse, how as mother leaders we can get new lawyers to engage while acknowledging them as a mother parent? Thank you for putting that in, Ruby, and I'm going to look for Courtney's question again. If one of you want to address that. Did I talk too fast?
I'd be happy to take a stab at Courtney's question. I actually think that Zoom has, which is what we're all doing these days, but I think that the pandemic has created new ways of communicating, some of which sometimes we don't always love being on Zoom. I think we miss being in rooms. But Zoom has opportunities, and I've heard, for example, many examples where a meeting which would have taken place in person only with senior partners now takes place online, where associates and younger partners are in the room where it happens and get to participate. And that wouldn't have happened pre-pandemic necessarily. And in fact, even having Zoom calls pre-pandemic, where you could see people and see their backgrounds and maybe hear the dog bark and have a kind of personal conversation around that. That didn't happen before either. It's happening now. And I also think that Zoom offers an interesting opportunity to get to know clients, whether you're in a corporation or a law firm. Because again, you don't have to travel. You can call up or just call to chat. And it's fun to do it on Zoom. And now I know not everybody thinks Zoom is fun, but I actually much prefer Zoom these days to telephone calls. I like seeing people, I like seeing their reactions. I like hearing the dog in the background or the kids or seeing, what the window shades look like or curtains. And it's an odd way can be more personal than it used to be with just phone calls. So I think there's an opportunity there.
So Courtney goes on to say, can you share your thoughts on how the pandemic has created opportunities for women? Do you think they have in fact created opportunities for women? She thinks it has.
I think so. I don't know if it was Courtney or maybe it was you or someone else on the chat that said, sorry if that you worked remotely. Was it Courtney for a decade? And then now you're getting legitimized of what you were having high quality work. I mean, I ran my law firm for a year, 14 months in Dubai in 2011, before it was cool to run your firm remotely, and the tech was a little rusty, but it got better a decade later. And the only way I was able to do that, follow my husband halfway around the world, was because the tech did exist, and I ran, and I was able to be mommy by day and attorney by night because of the time difference. And I think that gives us that flexibility, especially if we're not expecting people to come in every day, and people are able to prove that they can get the same amount of work done or quality work. And then like just what we've been saying about not having to travel around, or, we're not having to fly to have a 1 hour phone call, a 1 hour meeting, and so that makes it more conducive. Or for me, I'm doing lots of speeches and I'm not having to fly or travel or anything. I can just hop on Zoom in a moment's notice. So that's actually helping me a lot in my rainmaking. So I think, of course, on the caregiving front, yeah, that's tough if it hasn't been equalized. But in terms of, I think it's given us more opportunity to be productive without, and just giving us a lot more opportunity.
It cuts both ways that, obviously a lot of women left their professions because of child issues and during the pandemic, and schools closed, and even now there's not as much childcare available as there was before the pandemic. So that's been tough on women because, as we discussed in the beginning of the discussion, it's often women who do the child care. I think in last year's McKinsey Women at Work study, it was women were 3 times more likely to do most of the child care. So, we know that. So that's hard, but I totally agree with what you said about, the ability to interact with people on Zoom that you don't have to go travel to see. Also, I think just being a mother, it allowed me to actually do PTA meetings and be actually more involved in my kids' school than I ever could have been before, because they were all remote. And I live in a suburb where, most of the people active in the PTAs and other organizations are moms who maybe aren't traveling into the nearby city, to New York City for me, to work. And so I was actually able to participate much more, I think, than I would have been had those been in person at 11 a.m., in our suburb, which would have been much more difficult for me. So that part I think is a positive. And I actually agree with Stephanie. I like interacting with people, and I find that connecting with them good on video. What would have been a phone call before is now often a Zoom call, and we can actually read each other's body language. And, for me now in my job, it's subscribers and sources, and, I think I can interact better with them on Zoom than perhaps as a phone call in pre-pandemic, pre-Zoom. We didn't even know what the word Zoom was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Someone,
I just use Skype a lot, and now we moved over to Zoom. Yeah. Sandy,
someone asked whether, I'm sorry, Stephanie, go ahead.
No, I was just wondering if I can answer the question about the great mom, mediocre lawyer.
Absolutely. That's
okay.
what I was going to turn to.
I think you can be a great mom and a great lawyer. I don't even put this mediocre stuff in your vocabulary. It's really about, what it is to you, is being successful and great. You can't, like Stephanie said, she didn't buy all the clothes for her kids. I sometimes I'd send the nanny or whoever, my assistant, to take my kids to the doctor, the dentist, and they would just call me when the doctor was finally talking to us. You had to be creative, and don't beat yourself up about it. But I think you can be great at both. And maybe you have to put one that will give it more of the front seat and the other one the back seat a little bit. But I think I think that you can be great at both, and just be realistic with yourself, what that is, have boundaries, have support, have good role models. It's part of the whole package. And I think figuring out that balance is really critical, and it takes time. But if we share this information, those who've gone through it and now those who are going through it, I think we can help you so not have to reinvent the wheel as much as we might have had to do.
Well, we are down to 3 minutes according to Sasha. And I just want to say thank you for the panelists. I think this was an excellent discussion. I've been trying to answer questions in the chat and the Q&A as we go, so I hope I had everybody answer them. If not, please feel free to email any of us. We're happy to respond. That is all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank the Women Rainmakers Committee and all of you for attending our webinar today. And we really appreciate everyone attending and participating in this very important topic. Thank you.